This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. All right, guys, we got a very special return guest to the show. That is Rickson Gracie. So Rickson Gracie is actually a 9th degree red belt in Gracie Jiu Jitsu. We actually talked about that at the beginning of the episode because back on the last podcast that he was on, so he was on episode 242 of this podcast, he was actually an 8th degree red belt. And so I think in the interview he said that he is now a 9th degree, but basically he's 65 years old and has been a black belt for 45 years, which makes him a 9th degree red belt. And so this guy is just absolutely incredible. He is the son of the godfather of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. That's Helio Gracie. And Rickson's considered to be one of the greatest Gracie fighters ever, and he's the Gracie family champion. And he is a pioneer in the sport of Jiu Jitsu and mixed martial arts. Whenever he was fighting vale, tudo, that was kind of an early form of MMA. He's undefeated in that. And guys, I've said before that on my Mount Rushmore, he's on there. So a lot of people will put his brother Royce up there because he won the first two UFC events, UFC 1 and UFC 2, and he kind of started the revolution of jiu-jitsu in terms of its popularity in America. But even at that time, everyone knew that he was the better fighter by a long shot, including Royce, and we talk about that a little bit in this particular podcast. But he is the author of the book called Breathe, A Life in Flow. So that was his biography that we had him on to talk about here a few years ago. But his newest book is called Comfort in Darkness, The Invisible Power of Jiu-Jitsu. So the interesting thing about this book is this is kind of like a life lessons book, but it's applicable to guys that are into fighting and guys that aren't into fighting, which is interesting now because he teaches a lot of people that are not competitive jiu-jitsu fighters. These are not MMA fighters. He's teaching just people basic life lessons, and he's using jiu-jitsu to do it. And so in this particular podcast, we talk about a lot of different things. We talk about the differences in the two books, basically how there is a literal kind of mat-focused lesson in each one of these things that he's talking about, but also a figurative, more metaphorical one for life. We get into a spiritual breakdown. Because he talks about spiritualism a lot in his book. And like I've said before, demons are spirits. So we got to be a little bit more specific. So we dug into that a little bit more as well. We talked about how he developed his mindset because even as a kid growing up in the chaotic Gracie family, and there were fights going on constantly, he didn't just want to be a fighter. He didn't just want to be a champion. He wanted to be the Gracie family champion. And there's a lot of differences and nuances in that. But then we talked about how there was an experience he experienced very early on when he was a young teenager that led him to understand that I've got to find a way to find comfort in darkness. And so we get into that story. We talk about how his first fight in Brazil, his first vale tudo MMA fight, how he felt like he didn't break physically or mentally, but he actually broke spiritually, and how that has basically taught him how to comport himself as he moves forward in life. But also how if you're getting better at something that is a fighting style like jiu-jitsu, how humility needs to be involved with a lot of that. We talked about his final MMA fight against Funaki, where both guys basically came into the fight with, I'm not going to tap, we're not throwing in the towel, it's either death or we win, that type of an idea. But also, he is currently in the middle of his toughest fight of his entire life, and that's his fight against Parkinson's disease. And so he was diagnosed with Parkinson's in 2021, and he brought that up a lot in the interview, and I asked him specifically about that towards the end. And then we talked a little bit about if he fantasized about fighting Mike Tyson back in the day when he was in his prime, but if he was in his prime right now against the current crop of MMA fighters, who are the guys that he would want to test his mettle against? And I really, really enjoyed his answer, but also just the difference between jiu-jitsu for competition and jiu-jitsu for self-defense or fighting, and how we kind of have a little bit of a watered-down sense of our abilities if we're only sticking to competition jiu-jitsu. But guys, I think I mentioned this last time, but when you're talking to this guy, it's like, wait a minute, your family invented the thing that I've dedicated my adult life to now, which is, learning the sport of jiu-jitsu. And, now as a brown belt, it's like, you're kind of knocking on the door of black belt, but black belt is almost like going back down to white belt, almost like you're just starting. And so when you get to talk to a guy like that, an absolute lion of the sport, an absolute pioneer, it is always something that I will, definitely not take for granted. It is an incredible opportunity. I'm just so glad he was able to make some time for us this time around as well to talk about his new book. I will always take advantage of being able to chat with the one and only Rickson Gracie. So guys, without further ado, let's get into it. Rickson Gracie, welcome back to Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast.
Thank you, my brother. It's great to be here with you.
Hey, I'm so psyched to have you. Now, I got to ask you because I'm not really keeping up, but the last time we had you on the show was when we were talking about your book, Breathe. I think at that time you were a 9th degree red belt in Gracie Jiu Jitsu. Is that still where you're at now? What's your current level that you've gotten to?
No, actually, I'm making 65 years old this month. And then I have the 45 years old of black belt to get the 90 degrees. So At that point, I was still 8 degree.
Ah,
From my birthday on, I'm going to be 9 degree.
that is just simply incredible. And for guys, I mean, we've talked about jujitsu a lot on this show. I mean, I've talked about before. I just got my brown belt this year, and so by the
Congratulations.
time, thank you so much. By the time I get to black belt, which hopefully next 2, 3, 4 years or something like that, it's like I'll be a black belt, but then there will be guys that have been training for longer than I've even they've had their black belt rather for longer than I've even been training. So it's a wide swath of different experiences. But a good place to start, I guess, Rickson, is obviously you're on here to talk about your new book. It's called Comfort in Darkness: The Invisible Power of Jiu-Jitsu. I just finished it a couple of weeks ago. I thought the book was absolutely fantastic. I remember reading Breathe and being so enthralled with all the stories. And you had a lot of that still in this book, but let's just start there. What's different between your first book, Breathe, and this new book, Comfort in Darkness?
Yeah, Breed was my life story, my biography. So tell everything about happens with me and my life and with my family. This second book comes more towards how I deal with problems, how I deal with I got Parkinson a few years ago, and how I deal with my health, how I deal with my stress, how I deal with, to use jiu-jitsu in a visible aspect, to facilitate my life, to overcome problems and emotional disturbance.
And I really enjoyed how, because a lot of those stories, because when I read Breathe, I knew some of those stories, but I didn't know a lot of those stories about your life. But then when they came back up in Comfort in Darkness, I kind of had an idea as to what the stories were, where they were going, but you did apply some of the things that you learned as a part of that. So I thought that was interesting. Now, the subtitle of the book is The Invisible Power of Jiu-Jitsu. And you refer to invisible jujitsu throughout the book. So in the book, you talk about the different interconnected elements of physical, spiritual, and mental. And we talk about that on this show as well. But you also talk about the jujitsu litany of base and engagement and connection and leverage and timing. And if you've done jujitsu, obviously you know how important those things are. But you said with each of those two definitions, there's kind of a literal one for how you use it on the mat, and then more of a figurative one or a metaphorical one for life. So can you explain to us how invisible jiu-jitsu applies when we are on the mats, but also when we're off?
Yeah, what I call invisible jiu-jitsu is the tools you can have in the spiritual warrior arsenal to become a warrior, to become practical in warfare. So it's not all those elements, not all those tools are physical and technical. Some are spiritual, some are more emotional. So you have to deal with all the tools in order to be able to pass this information, this knowledge to life itself. Because if you're too much in the sport of jiu-jitsu, you devote yourself to how to pass a guard, how to submit somebody, how to throw somebody, how to keep surviving, and a much more physical experience. So you become more like an athlete.
Mm-hmm.
But if you try to become a martial arts doesn't have rules of engagement. So if you know jiu-jitsu, if you're a good experienced jiu-jitsu competitor, you're not thinking you're going to fight on the street and find the same environment. Can be against more than multiple attackers. Can be an environment you're not controlling the weather. Can be a slippery. Can be dangerous in many different ways. So you have to be a martial artist to capitalize on the information you receive. You live the now, and then you can say, okay, it's not good for me to fight here. It's better go to the dry land. It's better go to do this. It's better apologize now and come back later with my guys. So martial arts becomes more complex because you're dealing with life. And in order for you to do completely comfortable in that unpredictable situations, you have to be comfortable to use the concepts, the tools of of the spiritual warrior in order to achieve complete view of the scenario, in order for you to be able to conquer what you need, the challenge you have. Not only because if you think physically only, you can make a lot of mistakes. You cannot using big part of yourself. So I start with breathing. Breathing can be a great help for fighters, for athletes, for any athlete who evolves in physicality, know how to breathe. It will help him tremendously in terms of cardiovascular endurance, in terms of keeping the momentum, finding the rhythm. But breathing also help you in your emotional. Breathe also help you to relax yourself, because the lung has the unique capacity to connect yourself with your brain and with your heart. And the brain and the heart are the only organs in the body who can give and receive information. So you normal and home, happy, you get a mail, you're going to lose your house in a month. So you get stressed, how this can happen. So emotionally you're completely disturbed. If you don't know how to relieve that disturbance, that's problem, you're going to stick with that feeling, that anger, that sensation through the day, sometimes through weeks, because you cannot just physically clean yourself from this kind of burn. So by knowing how to breathe, you can have a relaxation breathe, a meditative breathe, and can calm yourself up. And then when you come back from the breathing, you're going to look for the same problem. You're going to say, you're going to still have the problem, but you're not more emotionally involved. You relax. You have to deal with this with a different mind, peace of mind, So the idea of having the breathing to help me, not only in fighting, but also in life, to accommodate myself, is a big deal of difference. Same thing when you're talking about base. Base can be a very physical base to not let yourself get off balance, to be strong in yourself, to be capable to capitalize on your opponent's mistakes. But base means you have base to talk about podcasts and networks because you've been involved. I have no base for that.
Yeah.
So and that's in a metaphor way feels like I'm off balance. I need to learn. I need to respect. I need to give the props to the other person, because that shows not only respect but put yourself in a good balance in your position. So when you have base, when you believe in your base, you believe also has something you not having the same base, have something you have to learn, to be humble, to be nice. So put yourself, when you have the base as a metaphor for life, put you in a balance with the reality of how you feel about many different subjects. Timing. Timing is another subject very important, because the timing can help you to deflect a punch or go for a throw or a takedown. But also the timing for you to talk with your wife about some subject, sensitive subject. You have to get the good mood for her. You have to have the good time to speak. The timing for you to get raised, talk about raising your salary with your boss. You cannot get the time he's upset. You have to have the time he's in a good mood. So the timing for you to make a trip, how early you're gonna get in the airplane in the airport to get the plane. So timing has a lot of objectivity in life. You have to be punctual. You have to know when you speak and when you shut up. You have to know how to punch and how to deflect the punch. So I respect timing in a conceptual way in many different subjects. My timing has to be perfect, not only to approach a business proposition, but also to fight, but also to know my health. So time is an important subject in general. Strategy. Strategy is a great tool for the spiritual warrior, because everything you do, even happiness, is not going to be sitting in your lap. You're not going to be happy for no reason. You're happy because you bought a car. You're happy because your kid went to school. You're happy because you get out of sickness. You have a reason. But that happiness is not going to stick with you for long. 5 years from now, other things are going to bring you happiness. If not, you're not going to happy, because what brings you happiness 10 years ago is not going to make you happy today.
Right.
So strategy is a part of you who's going to be always escalating, always pursuing happiness. What I need to be more happy. what I need to be in the good direction. So all this idea coming from strategy. In order for you to buy a car, you have to know how much money you have in the bank, what car you want to buy, how many months you're going to pay. So you have to organize a good strategy to be able to buy the car, keep the car, use the car, and be happy with the car. If you buy a too expensive car, you may going to get problems in the future. If you get a car too cheap and going to break down on you, you're not going to have so the good strategy has to plant the seeds for the future. So strategy, same thing to pass a guard, and after the pass the guard, if the guy turns around, I go for the Ezekiel, I go for the new move or an old move, I go for a footlock. So what I'm going to do from there cannot be take it for granted. I cannot allow myself to be lucky. I don't believe in lucky at all. Lucky is to find a parking space in front of the movie theater. But I don't put lucky on my endeavors. I don't put lucky on my objectivity, on my training. I always strategize who I'm going to compete against, what's going to happen. So visualization is a great tool for the warrior. If you don't visualize, if you're in a sport or in a profession, like if you are Navy SEAL, for example, you have to visualize getting to the land, take over, kill everybody, do everything perfect with all your friends alive. That's a perfect deal for you. But can be less deal. You can have the same objectivity, you can win the same way, but you can lose 2 or 3 guys in the endeavor. Or you can get shot. Or you can even get killed. So in your visualizations, you have to visualize all the perspectives could happen in your endeavor. Even death. For a Navy SEAL, he has to accept death as a natural thing in the job. He don't want to die, but he has to know what he's doing could possibly kill him at any time. Like a fireman. How you can be a fireman thinking about saving a kid from the 10th floor in fire and not thinking you can die trying. Any situation for a fireman can be a life-threatening. So if he's a good fireman, he has to know he loves his family, he knows what he do, he knows all the hoses and the bombs and the pumps, but he also has to have visualization about the problems he may have and how to escape from a fire, how to do something. And if he doesn't have escape, I'm going to die. And if I die trying something good, I'm proud of it. So everything is under perspective. They cannot forget something. They cannot not visualizing. So all the tools, the spiritual warrior, are there to help you in life, in action, and also in spirituality.
Well, Rickson, that was one thing that was so apparent, and what made Comfort in Darkness such an interesting read for me is obviously I loved all the jiu-jitsu stuff and all the vale tudo and MMA stuff that you talked about, but it was the dual applicability of what you were talking about, how this applies if you're, training jiu-jitsu or how you're doing this in life. But just to go a little further on the spiritual thing, just to make sure people know what you're talking about when you talk about spiritual, you're talking about the things that we can't see. In the book, you talk about panic, endurance, acceptance, hope. And I'm going to read a quote from the book because this is your first fight in Brazil against King Zulu. So it's a very interesting quote. When I fought my first professional fight in 1980, I was overconfident and learned a harsh, life-changing lesson about the difference between a professional vale tudo bout and competitive jiu-jitsu. Within seconds of the opening bell, my opponent, a big, scary, seasoned pro fighter, dragged me into deep, uncharted waters and made me fight for my life. Everything had been theoretical up to that point, but I learned a life-changing lesson during that fight. Sometimes you don't break physically, you break spiritually. So I want to talk a little bit more about that because you do talk about God in this book. I don't really know exactly where you land because you don't talk about Jesus, but you do spend a lot of time talking about the ethereal, about the spiritual side. So how does your personal faith really align with not only how you lead your life, but how you would fight when you're still an active fighter?
Yes. For me, I could achieve, because in Jiu-Jitsu, we have the triangle my family tradition logo was a triangle. And that represents the balance, the perfect balance. You don't see a triangle fall off balance. It's always going to fall in base. And that's for me for a long time was a explanation or a simplifying the spirit, the idea of jiu-jitsu of being in balance. But it was at that time much more physical balance than actually the balance I devote right now. Because once I was into the triangle, in the trilogy of the experience, I start to understand from a picture I took from the Buddha, from the shy Buddha. I start making designs. I put a design to make a logo over this shy Buddha picture. And eventually he get in the triangle, but it was a triangle who has motion, who has different pieces connected. It's not one triangle simple. My design of my logo is like three different pieces of movement, which makes triangle. And for me, those three pieces are connected because it's body, mind, spirit. The idea of combining your body, your mind, your spirit, it starts becoming very clear in my mind. I could not be the best I can be if I just take care of my body. I cannot be the best I can be if I just take care of my mind. And I cannot be the best I can be if I just be spiritual. The combination of the three will make me powerful. Because I know what I want. I know my problems, physical. But I can accept. If I have acceptance, if I have faith, if I have hope, I can really become a different piece. Because I will be much more relying on things I cannot see, but I have to believe. If I cannot believe, if I don't believe I'm going to outcome my opponent, I don't want to win the fight, nothing I will do will resolve the matter. I have first to believe and then put the beliefs into actions, into performance, into physicality, into emotional control. Same thing from my emotions. If I'm not thinking, I'm accepting death as a regular outcome from a mistake, I'm not being comfortable to get problems there. If I get problems there, I will chicken out, like I did in my first fight. So my idea of having problems, my idea of having, like in my last fight with Funaki, I get a orbital fracture, and I still calm, and my brother tell me to stand up, and I thinking about what he's saying, and said, no, I cannot stand up now, I'm blind. So 45 seconds into the fight, into that problem, I recover the vision in one eye. And then I could keep fighting, and then I win my opponent. But it's up to me, make a poker face, don't let him know I'm in pain. And I still feel confident, even though I has a problem. I visualizing this before. I never use it, but I visualizing I'm in trouble. And if I'm in trouble, I will try to fix the problem. And if the problem has no fix, my brother has to throw the towel, or I'm going to accept death, because I'm not thinking about quitting anymore. Quitting is not an option. So all those combinations between the spiritual, the emotional, and the technical make me feel like I start to creating solutions and acceptance to become unbreakable, regardless the outcome of the fight, regardless the outcome. I have Parkinson now. Parkinson becomes my newer opponent. And I not allowed the doctors just take care of myself and give me one pill, give me cardiovascular exercise, and tell me for me to live with my life. I started searching all the situations, all the doctors, all the people who can help me. And so far now, I haven't changed my life in tremendously. I stopped eating meat. I stopped drinking any alcohol, beer or wine. I fasting. I do physiotherapy protocols every day. I do good nutrition, supplements, all the supplements I can put my hands on, mushrooms from places, special places. So I become focused and do strategically everything I can do to beat Parkinson. I'm not sure if I'm going to beat Parkinson, if Parkinson is going to beat me. But my mood now is quit is not an option. Accepting the sickness take over and I do nothing is not an option. So I will be resilient. I will be completely comfortable in dealing with that problem and start accepting my decrease in physicality. but I not accept doing nothing about it. So I'm fighting with all my guts, all my heart, comfortably happy to the end. So I'm just accepting the situations, but I don't relax on it. I'm just fighting my exercise. So today I'm feeling happy because I'm more motivated as never to teach and talk about invisible jiu-jitsu. And Parkinson is like I kind of establish. Uh, it's not evolving too much. So I feel like my symptoms are kind of stable. I feel very happy in my conditions right now and my situation, how I'm dealing with my life, my health, my work. So everything works good for me based on that kind of martial arts spirit, which is positive, which take you for the next level.
Well, and I remember reading in this book about your fight, which ended up being your last vale tudo or MMA fight with Funaki, how when Funaki woke up after you had put him out, after he went limp, he was so thankful to be alive because you two both went into that fight thinking there is no tap, there is no throw in the towel. It's either win or death. And for both of you, luckily, you both were able to make your way out of that fight. You were the only one that got your hand raised. But one thing you're talking about, Rickson, when you're talking about resilience and you're talking about mindset is literally, the title of the book, but it's finding comfort in darkness. And so I want to read a quote because it's a very funny story. Well, it seemed funny. It probably wasn't funny at the time, but I've shared this with a lot of people to kind of let them understand where I'm coming from whenever I'm explaining things, but certainly how you explain it in the book. So here's the quote. My first experience with irrational fear occurred at my father's academy when I was barely a teenager. A big man caught me in a tight headlock, and as I began to work my escape, his hot, stinky gi covered my head. Suddenly, I got claustrophobic and was overcome with a fight or flight sense of panic. Instead of calmly escaping from the hold like I had done so many times before, I tapped out in front of my brothers, cousins, and friends. And literally, when I read that sentence, I was like, oh, it's like I could feel that moment that you were having. Ashamed and disgusted with myself, when I got home, I knew that I had to face my demons. So I asked my older brother, Holes, to roll me up in our living room carpet. I told him to leave me inside for 10 minutes, no matter how loud I screamed. As the hot, mildewy carpet began to envelop me, I thought for a moment that I might die. Then I started thinking about the beach, a sea breeze, and a cold coconut water. My claustrophobia passed because I found comfort in darkness. And you describe how you did that a couple of more times to really challenge yourself mentally. I remember during your career fighting in Japan, you would go into cold water and submerge yourself, but not in just like a cold tub, like in a rushing river of cold water. That's in a documentary that was made about your life and things as well. So for normal folks that aren't MMA fighters or jiu-jitsu competitors that are maybe just working a job and trying to do well for their family, why are you wanting people to find ways to where they can find comfort in darkness?
Because average people feel the same problems. They have the same level of stresses and doubts and insecure state of mind, fears. So the emotional, the physical, maybe the physical is not intense as a fighter because you don't put your physicality 100%. But emotionally, the responsibility of your kids, your job, lack of money, health, sickness, all this can bring a lot of problems for the individual. And I believe in order for you to deal with problems, you have to be a champion. You have to have the mentality of a warrior. You cannot take you by the hand and lead you to any hole they want to put you in. You have to fight. Oh, I don't want to go in this hole. Oh, this one I like it. I like to be in the jacuzzi, but I don't like to be in the... So you have to make choices. Everything is about choices. So my advice for anyone is first find a purpose in life. Without purpose, you don't have discipline. You don't have interest in follow up. No strategy. So finding a purpose is not easy. It's maybe the most difficult thing, especially a purpose who can give you somehow a life, generate money for you and generate a life. Because if your purpose is running on the grass, you're not going to get rich, you're not going to have family, so there's no purpose on that. But if your purpose is being an engineer or a lawyer or working with kids, so you're going to find yourself directing this purpose, not only to fulfill your life, but also to be able to provide for yourself and your family. So finding a purpose is an important matter. Once you have that, you can connect with all the elements you need to enforce this purpose. Your discipline, your strategy, your hope, your faith. Without those elements, I don't have to be a champion to be hopeful. I don't have to be a champion to be faithful or to believe and visualization, for example. Even an average Joe has to visualize that I have to go to work, I have to bring money to my family, I have to raise my kids. So, but if my kid has problems to learn, I have to put him in a special lessons. So you have to deal with problems you have strategically correct. You have to play the problems you have emotionally in control. You cannot get panic. You cannot get afraid. So it's a ways for you not being a champion and still having yourself emotionally under control. It's a ways for you not being a physical monster, but you still have under control. You still being healthy, eating nutritional values, eating well, doing protocols of exercise. So you are health life. You're not an athlete, but you're a healthy guy to raise your. So if you don't care about what you eat, chances are you're going to get sick too soon. If you drink everything, if you eat sweets, if you eat junk food, eventually you're going to get sick. So it's a good strategy for you if you want to raise your kids and be happy with your kids 20 years from now playing soccer. You have to eat well. You have to take it. So it's a lot of tools of the spiritual warrior, which I believe I suggest for people, average people, to start to use it. Because what I see today, in general, is the humanity being dehumanized. The robotics, the technology, the internet, make you feel like you're alive, you're well, but you're not feeling things. It's completely virtual. So you post of yourself the best pictures you can find, but you don't show when you look ugly.
Mm.
You see everything on the internet, what you want, what places you want to go, but you sit in a couch or lay down in bed. So this guy who is virtually know everything, when he goes to the street, he gives the hand like soft hand. He don't look the guy in the eye. He don't know how to approach a girl physically and talk to her because everything is a quick fix on the internet. Living a life alive, living the now is a very important for anyone. That's why even for you as a brown belt or even if you're a beginner in jiu-jitsu, when you get into the mat in jiu-jitsu, you can get into the academy with full problems in your mind. Family problems, business problems. When you get into the mat and guys start to try to choke you, you forget everything and just thinking about survive.
Right.
There's no other option. Either survive or putting pressure on your opponent. So you start to playing a game who bring you to now. Living the now is very difficult for people today. And living the now is a very easy thing for jiu-jitsu practitioners.
Right. I think it comes down to mindset, Rickson. I wanted to actually ask you about that as it pertains to jiu-jitsu people, because for you at an early age, I mean, you had guys storming your father's gym, and you had to have a family champion to answer the calls for different fights for your family. And you didn't just want to be a fighter. You didn't just want to be a jiu-jitsu guy. You wanted to be a champion. And so your mindset was being formulated at such an early age. So how do you feel like that applies to what we were talking about just now?
And not early age, but in a very wild environment. Because for me, to represent what I believe, I have to visualize my opponent with no weight division, no time limits, no rule sets, with gi, without gi, can fight on the street, on the asphalt, on the concrete. So the idea of being unpredictable for me was much broader than just being a jiu-jitsu competitor. I was jiu-jitsu representative against anything, anyone, anytime. So the challenge was bigger. It was unpredictable. So how are you going to deal with something unpredictable without hope, without faith, without patience, without acceptance of you can get killed. So all those spiritual warrior tools were inflicting my mindset very early because my goals are completely different than other people's goals. I want to be representing jiu-jitsu regardless. So if devil himself coming and say he don't believe in jiu-jitsu, I have to fight the guy, I have to fight the monster. So in order for me to feel comfortable in that rule set, I have to create a spiritual value which transcends that kind of commitment.
Hey guys, real quick. Do you remember during the pandemic when you basically couldn't get anything shipped to your house? All this manufacturing that was supposed to be taking place in America had been shipped overseas and you just didn't notice it. And I remember a bunch of companies saying, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that we bring manufacturing back to America, and almost none of them followed through on that promise. But for me and for all of us here at Undaunted Life, I wanted to make sure that I partnered with an American company that actually did want to prioritize American workers, their families, their communities, and a company that would keep their word. And that's why I want to remind you that we are partnered with Origin. Origin is an apparel company based in Maine, and what do they make? They make the best jiu-jitsu gis on the planet and the only jiu-jitsu gis that are made completely in America. They also make jeans. Yes, they have stretchy jeans. They also have work jeans and bootcut jeans for you guys as well. They make amazing hunting gear. And here's the thing. I know you guys like some other hunting brands, but those companies are American companies that use overseas labor to increase their profit margins on their gear, not to help you or Americans out. They also offer handmade leather boots. That does include steel toe boots and mock toe boots. And they also make workout clothes and everyday pants and shirts and almost indestructible hoodies. And they're launching new apparel all the time. Guys, if you haven't already tried Origin stuff, you need to check them out and support a company that supports Americans. Try Origin out today by going to www.originusa.com. That's originusa.com. Use the promo code UNDAUNTED to get 10% off your order. Again, that's originusa.com. Promo code UNDAUNTED to get 10% off your order. And I think in addition to that, there's an element here that people can go one way or another when they do jiu-jitsu. They can either learn the skill set and get really cocky about it, or they learn the skill set, and what's more likely is you realize that there's always someone out there that's badder than you. There's always someone out there that's bigger, stronger, that one of these days you're not going to be the hammer, you're going to be the nail. And there's actually a quote from the book that I love that kind of speaks to this. Very little changed in my day-to-day after I won in Japan. After a short surf trip, I returned to LA and resumed teaching and training at my academy. Now, people treated me like a powerful person because of my recent victory in Japan. I did not allow this flattery to affect me. I did not cure cancer or usher in an era of world peace. I was neither a king nor a saint and never allowed myself to lose sight of the fact that I was a mere mortal who happened to be good at jiu-jitsu. Now, here's the thing. You are one of the greatest MMA fighters of all time. You're a pioneer of MMA. Your family invented the sport that I've dedicated hundreds of hours to, and that a lot of my friends, we've collectively dedicated thousands and thousands of hours to. But talk to me about how jiu-jitsu, just training it and going and constantly keeping yourself accountable to what goes on the mat, how that actually helps you remain humble even as you get better and better at the skill set.
Yeah. Jiu-jitsu is a complement for life. So you engage in jiu-jitsu, you start to become more understandable about your physicality, about your emotions, about your heartbeats, about your panics. And you start to get negotiating better emotionally and physically and technically with all those disturbance, all this uncomfortable situation. And those eventually is not going to be more uncomfortable. They become like acceptable, and eventually will become transformed to comfortable. So jiu-jitsu has different objectivities. I can have a student who are going to plan to make a champion of him because he has the ideas, the interest, the competitiveness, the toughness, the physicality. But the majority of my students, I don't see them as champions, but I see them as from average people. They start to become more confident in their efforts and their results. I can change people's. They can be a better father, a better police officer, a better doctor, a better lawyer, because he's more confident and approaching scenarios. So jiu-jitsu can help in any level people to bring them grounded, to bring them strength, to bring them in a sense of comfort to negotiate life itself.
Well, I got to tell you, Rickson, for me, you're exactly right. When jiu-jitsu just kind of reveals who you are, you talked about whether you're mean or whether you're violent or whether you're cowardly. For me, there was a lot of insecurity when I started training because I started training at the age of 30. And so I'm like, well, crap, I didn't start when I was a kid. I'm starting as an adult. And I had played ball sports. So I had played, baseball and football and basketball and just anything pick up. And I did a little bit of wrestling. And so you go up against somebody that's maybe smaller than you, maybe you don't see them as athletic as you, and then they beat you. And especially in those early days of jiu-jitsu, I would just respond, get so mad and storm off the mat. And it's just, I look back on that person and think, I don't know that I could have done anything, Rickson, as a hobby that would have taught me the lessons of humility that jiu-jitsu has, because you're embarrassed at how you acted. You embarrassed at how you responded to a teammate, but then you got to go back and train. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so I don't think golf is going to teach you that. I don't think, trading cards is teaching you that, or fantasy football. I think jiu-jitsu is very unique in that. But with that, Rickson, there's obviously disappointments that come when somebody's training. That could be losses, it could be injuries or whatever. But for you elucidate in this book, as you did in your first book, Breathe, about the disappointment that the family did not pick you to compete in UFC 1, that they picked your brother Royce. And it was that, they didn't feel like they could control you, but they could control him. But they were kind of keeping you as the backup in case something went wrong with Royce, that you would kind of ride in, because everyone knew at the time, including Royce, including everyone in your family, that you were probably the most dangerous man alive on a mat. That had you done UFC 1 and UFC 2, it would have been an even more dominant performance than what we saw out of Royce. And that was very perplexing to you and very confusing and very disappointing. So for you, how did you deal with the disappointment at that time of kind of being passed over by your family and then fighting in Japan, which, you did well and made a good living over there? And then when you look back on that time period now, how do you look at that as a teaching moment for how you've been able to overcome disappointment?
I think that moment was a very dramatic moment in my life, because I felt like I was trying and fighting to represent the family. And then Rorion, which was the boss at the time organizing all the business, he creates the UFC. And because he was jealous, or not jealous, but he wants me to help him more than I was doing. I was separating myself from him. And he said, he believes more in Royce to teach to fight for him than myself. So his intention is to able to put Royce, and he's still controlling Royce as he wants to control me. He wants to control me, and he couldn't. So Rorion was creating that separation, and I accept that as something which is life. I get a little upset, but pass on. But just after that, I was invited to go to Japan. And I started making my professional career in Japan, which for me was great. And get this sour moment with Rorion. But I think life kind of just, I believe solutions coming without explanation. Things are created in a very holistic way, which you cannot explain. So just by being peaceful, just by accepting what Rorion did to me, immediately I get an answer from the other side and offer me some. So I was immediately follow my road. And then Japan was my land for a long time. I become very successful in Japan. And the UFC becomes huge. And everything was okay, but I see the evolutionary process of all this make UFC becomes more like a sport than actually martial arts event. Becomes a very competitive sport, very tough guys, but somehow I lost the interest to see UFC as much as I used to watch.
Well, I remember you talking about fighting in Japan. You liked fighting for the Japanese fans because you felt like they had a deeper understanding of warrior culture, how a warrior carries himself, kind of that samurai spirit, a much deeper understanding of martial arts. But you also talk about in the book competition jiu-jitsu versus jiu-jitsu for self-defense or for fighting. And you have some quotes in here about how a lot of a lot of people can train jujitsu and be really good at competition jujitsu, but they would be terrible in a street fight. They would be terrible in a situation where they needed to protect themselves or somebody else. You know, a lot of schools don't even focus on takedowns. And so if a fight starts on the feet and you're really good at all this guard stuff and all these random, interesting moves, but you can't get the fight to the ground, that's going to be problematic for you, especially in a very heightened scenario. So talk to me a little bit more about how you see the influence of MMA as a sport, as an athletic endeavor, or competition jujitsu as an athletic endeavor, perhaps leading to people not being as good at self-defense or applying that as they maybe think they are.
Yes, I believe when you stop learning self-defense, jiu-jitsu self-defense, you stop learning how to position yourself, how to approach yourself in a regular, common, aggressive situation. And then you start to losing perspective of how this can be dangerous, how this can be surprising. So you start to say, oh, I like to only play on the ground, guard, passing, using the gi. Sometimes without the gi, it's too slippery. So you start to putting yourself in a scenario which you control the environment. You don't have strikes, you have just slippery moves. So you're happy there. But if you go transform yourself for an MMA fighter, you're going to see how many problems you have to deal to cope with the needs of being a professional MMA. So the idea for you to be complete has to embrace martial self-defense. Because self-defense will give you the sense of how to approach, how to clinch, how to have base and movement, how to defend against strikes, how to defend kicks and punches, and when you mount, how to keep your position and be able to capitalize on the guy's mistakes. So mixed martial arts is a completely different monster than actually jiu-jitsu competition. And you have to be practice this in a very natural way. You cannot be only focused on sportive elements or rule sets. And with the martial arts, with the self-defense coming regularly in your activity, you start to become creative, you start to become improvised, you start to become more adapted to the street fight, adapted to the octagon fight, because you have your open mind for whatever happens. So you can see guys with much less technique, but with the martial arts vision for the fight. So sometimes the guy coming from Africa without too much techniques, but he's agile, he knows how to hit, he knows how to keep up, he knows how to create distance. And he can make a lot of success without having the perfect techniques. So the idea of engagement requires from you using techniques, but open your mind for what's there, what is out there for you to feel comfortable about it. So you have to be a martial arts in a complete spectrum, not only physicality.
Well, no, that's what I think about whenever, sometimes when I train with some friends, we will throw in some palm strikes. Maybe we'll put on big gloves. And so you're trying to work a mount escape, but the guy on top is just kind of keeping you honest, throwing like 50% strikes and things like that. But one thing that has kind of been a through point of this entire interview, and certainly in the reading of the book, is what you've mentioned several times. And that's your hardest fight of your life, which is currently your fight against Parkinson's. So you were diagnosed with Parkinson's in 2021, but I want to read this quote from the book because I absolutely loved it. Might be my favorite quote from the entire thing. In life and in jiu-jitsu, sometimes you are the hammer and sometimes you are the nail. When you are faced with unexpected challenges, you can either quit and submit without a fight, or you can take a deep breath and engage. While I might not be able to reverse the effects of Parkinson's disease, I will never cede an inch of ground to it without a fight. Like my father taught me, you can't defeat a person who never gives up. And so, Rickson, you're talking to guys in this audience right now that they might be struggling with a disease or a sickness, or they have a loved one that's struggling with a disease or sickness. And there are a lot of people that would just tell them, oh, it's okay if you just kind of take it easy and just kind of accept it, or, oh, you've lived a good life, or, oh, there's going to be better days for you, or something like that. And they don't have that fight that is required inside of them to actually do better, to have a better mental approach to the experiences that they're having. So what would be your message to people like that based on your own experience right now with your fight against Parkinson's?
Start to be grateful. Start to be thankful and grateful for the opportunity to be in earth until today. And expect die tomorrow. If you don't die tomorrow, it's a time for celebration. Because people think, oh, I'm going to die in a month, and start to depress yourself. Instead, thinking about you're going to die tomorrow, and if you survive tomorrow, is a big day for celebration. So changing your perspective of how much you need to be alive. Change your perspective of how grateful you are to be alive today. And how much emotions and how much thankful you are to being up today, enjoying your life, your family, your health. So you start to see, instead you see the negative perspective. Change everything for the positive perspective, because we all going to die. No matter what, if it's today or tomorrow, and a year, 10 years from now, we all going to die. Eventually, a majority of people going to get sick, going to sometimes spend some time on bed. So things are natural. You cannot see this as a natural. We don't control time. You may have an agenda, but you're not sure about your agenda a year from now because you're not sure what's going to be. So you can have appointments 1 year from now, but you're not sure if you're going to be there. So you cannot be disappointed by having something in your agenda. You have to be optimistic about something you can accomplish today. So shorter your perspective of life, more intense has to be your capacity to be alive and be serving and being happy and being at positive mode today. So if you find somebody who is happy, regardless if he's going to die or not, he passed to you happiness. He passed for you gratitude. So you can go in a hospital and talk with somebody who's in a terminal problem. He can be very inspired, very happy, very much accepting his destiny. Or he can be very healthy, but can be sick on his mind. So much problems, emotional problems and mental problems for average people. So you can see people who has no problems, seems like they have all the problems in the world. Negativity, depression, anxiety, stress. So if you don't start from within saying, God, thank you to be alive. Thank you to be able to be alive today and talk and serve and call and inspire somebody. So, of course, it's not easy. Of course, it's not something for you to be happy to be doing because you're in a terminal phase. But at least take you from the focus of the negativity and put you on a spiritual level of acceptance and solidarity, which becomes bigger than your end, becomes bigger than you wait yourself go to the end. In other words, you inspire people to become like you even when you're sick.
Absolutely. And you've seen different people, and we've all had examples of individuals that while they were sick, they showed tremendous courage and they showed that warrior-like spirit. I mean, I've seen that in kids. There's videos that bring me to tears every time of, a 7-year-old that doesn't have any hair and all that. And they're giving perspective. I remember this one young man that was like, I'm glad God allowed me to have cancer because that means it didn't happen to one of my sisters or something like that, which that's not exactly how it works. But to that kid, he's like, I can be a happy warrior and I'll do this just so another kid doesn't have to suffer. Rickson, we've gone everywhere in this conversation. We've covered a lot of ground in Comfort in Darkness, but I got one last question for you. You mentioned in Comfort in Darkness about how when you were fighting, you always fantasized about fighting Mike Tyson. So at the time, Mike Tyson was at his absolute prime, the scariest human being maybe anybody had ever seen, but obviously just a boxer. So boxing range and MMA range and jiu-jitsu, that's all very, very different. So at the time, you always fantasized about what you would do in that fight. But what I want to know, and I know you don't follow the UFC as much right now, but is there a current MMA fighter that if you were back in your physical prime, right? So if you were in your physical prime right now at your best fighting weight and fighting ability, is there that one fighter that you would want to test your skills against that's a currently active fighter?
So many different good ones, like John Jones, like this new guy, Brazilian striker, Anderson Silva. Some guys, they put themselves in a good level of being skilled. And for me, I was not in regard to the MMA rules. I will never fight any one of them in those rules, because for me, if I fight John Jones, which is about 30 or 40 pounds heavier than me, something I'm going to need is time.
Yeah.
I want to be able to survive for the first and then eventually capitalize on the mistake. That's what I believe could happen. I start to survive. He can catch me. Of course, I'm not saying I'm going to win, but in my hopes and my beliefs, my strategy will be survive, make him get tired, and capitalize. So that's my vision. Of course, that's just my side, and people cannot believe on that. But I never felt like disappointed with my vision in regard to all my opponents so far. I fought great fighters, I fought big wrestlers, I fought tough guys, and I felt like my strategy always prevailed. So I believe I could fight any one of those I always think about the heavyweights. I don't think about people in my weight division. So if I'm engaged with John Jones, for example, I will love to engage with him, but the possibilities for me, I just going to have a chance if it's a no time limit fight. I never will fight with him with limits, 3 rounds, 5 minutes. No way. Because it's too easy for them, spin, go all the energy, and then rest, and then spin again. And it's very hard when you're spinning, making crazy things. Until you get tired and make mistakes, your spinning gets a lot of results. So I will have to allow the guy spinning many times and for me to survive, and eventually he's going to get tired. If it's only short rounds of 5 minutes, the guy can fight with me forever. So the idea of capitalizing on the guy's mistake has to come in with a different rule set. I will allow the time not to be, will be a long time for fighting. And another important point is the cage. Fighting on the cage is the third element there. And if you're a great fighter and you're not accustomed to fight on the cage, you're going to have problems to free yourself from the cage. You're going to have problems to stand up using the cage. You're going to find yourself in many problems because if you're accustomed to use the cage, you're accustomed to use the cage against your opponent. And your opponent has to be accustomed to dealing, take your head off the cage, moving. So it's a lot of details. So if I'm going to fight with him, I will fight with him no time limits and no cage. Either an open match or either a cage where it's no cage, but it's just like walls make you feel inside. So that way, it's no cheating on using the walls. For me, those are 2 problems I could not resolve without practice. And I feel happy if I could use my jiu-jitsu. But today's the rule of engagements of the UFC becomes very sportive, very entertaining. But it's no technical, it's no martial arts. It's more like two super athletes engaging with each other.
It is certainly different watching guys now versus guys back when you were fighting, just the approach. Obviously, even in Pride, where you had a 10-minute first round and then you went into the later rounds, it's obviously very, very different than where we are today. But Rickson, it's always a pleasure to get a chance to talk to you and to talk to somebody that has helped invent the sport that has revolutionized my life. But that's all for me. Is there anything else you want to get off your chest?
No, my friend. I want to thank you very much for the support. I hope you like the second book, and we talk soon, okay? Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
God bless, brother.
There you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed the return appearance of Rickson Gracie on the show. But before I let you go, we are going to do a quick resilience boost. At Undaunted.Life, our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. So I've got 2 links for you today. I've got a link to Rickson's website, and I've also got a link where you can pick up his new book, Comfort in Darkness. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. And as always, we want to thank the band Holy Name for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Perpetua, which is off their self-titled debut album on Face Down Records. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.